I describe the work that we're doing in our program, it's that we're working to ensure that the coastal habitats and communities in Maryland are really equipped with the frameworks that they need to adapt to this increasing pace of coastal transformation that's caused by climate change. So as you guys all know already, let's see if I can get my slide to advance here. As you guys know already, change is here. So in Maryland, we've seen over a foot of sea level rise in the last century. We expect to see another foot by 2050 and up to 3 additional feet maybe by 2100. So very much like in the Netherlands, it's not a future challenge. The impacts are being felt and seen here now. And a lot of what I do in my role is think about scale and think about how we adapt Maryland's coastal policies, legal frameworks, funding frameworks to make it feasible for adaptation to happen at a really meaningful scale. And I'm also the one on our team prompting us to ask the tough questions, focus our programmatic work. So for example, where we work, we focus on Maryland's lower eastern shore because that's where 75% of the tidal wetlands are remaining. But we're asking those questions of where is the science telling us that we're going to have the highest likelihood of those marshes migrating in response and persisting in the future? And where can our coastal habitats actually provide the greatest risk reduction for our existing coastal communities? So we know that coastal habitats provide some protection for communities, and we've been partnering with Maryland's Department of Natural Resources and academic institutions like George Mason University to study just how much protection those habitats actually provide, and really just so that we can have that data when we approach communities and start to think about what our adaptation approaches might look like and start those conversations. So we're also targeting where across the landscape we want to engage with which communities might need us the most, because we know the impacts aren't felt sort of uniformly across the landscape. There are communities that are already experiencing the brunt of those impacts now. So we really want to work with communities that need the most help. And we're trying to work with decision makers to emphasize the cost effectiveness of those sort of solutions that I wouldn't describe that do everything, that are cost effective and equitable and save our ecology and then provide this resilience and protection. But we also want to work with communities and actually understand what their vision is for their community and what they want their communities to look like going forward. So you know, I've been working with TNC for nearly 14 years on this issue, pretty much predominantly throughout my career. And every community that we've worked with has different needs and different visions. So each engagement requires that slow, steady trust building and real actual communication to develop a shared vision and a pathway forward. And what I'm really hoping to talk about with everybody today is how anyone here on the line has approached working with communities, what lessons they've learned, and then really what lessons learned or challenges people are seeing in terms of identifying how to get this work to scale, because that's where my head's focused most of the time. I love working on the ground and getting to learn from communities, but how we start to scale that up is really a pressing question. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And already a lot of points that I am curious about in our conversation with the group, but I will give the floor now to Henk so he can also talk to us a little bit about what is the HIDAS and what does EcoShape do and how do they see nature-based solutions as well?
Yes, so I'm sharing the screen. Do you see it?
We can see it
yes.
Well. If you can make it bigger, that's...
Yeah, I'm trying to make it full, yeah.
Oh, so, a little, there we go, perfect.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. My name is Henk Nieboer. I graduated in '87 as a civil engineer in Delft University, joined a Dutch engineering company, Witteveen and Bos, where I worked for 32 years. I spent most of my time there as an hydraulic and coastal engineer, spent 11 years on the board of directors, but stepped down in 2017. Stayed on for another 2 years, and since 2 years I'm a self-employed individual, professional. And most of my time I'm now active as director at the EcoShape Foundation. EcoShape is the foundation that manages the public-private innovation program Building with Nature. And Building with Nature is an approach to realize climate-resilient infrastructure through nature-based solutions. It's a global trend. Nature-based solutions are very much in fashion. Everybody wants it. So there is a plethora of manuals that have been produced over the last few years. Yesterday, I was in the Climate Adaptation Summit in the Nature-Based Solution Anchoring event. Everybody wants it, but implementation and upscaling still seems to be seriously challenging. And why could that be? Well, we think because nature-based solutions are dynamic, as opposed to a traditional infrastructure, which is relatively static most of the time. They are multifunctional, so they have their influence on many stakeholders. They are perceived as being innovative to deal with water issues. So there's some hesitance at the side of asset managers or infrastructure managers to use them. And they are always local and context specific, so they are difficult to copy paste. So it needs thinking, acting, and interacting differently than before. That's from the perspective of the engineer. My organization started 12 years ago this innovation program, Building with Nature, and it is organized in a typically Dutch fashion. We work together in the Dutch Diamond approach. We bring the public sector, private sector, NGOs, and knowledge institutes together, and we work in integrated team on pilot projects. We build actual nature-based solutions. We monitor and analyze them, and what we learn, we translate to practical design guidelines, and we try to support our projects with fundamental knowledge development at universities or knowledge institutes as Deltares as much as possible. The guidelines that we produced are available through our website. So also, if you would like to use them, you can visit our website and you can see for various landscapes what we have found and how you can use that knowledge. These are an overview of the pilot projects we worked on. A famous one is the sand motor on the Delftland coast. It's a mega nourishment of sand. But we also did smaller experiments in a freshwater lake with a sand engine. We experimented with nature-based solutions in cities, and we rehabilitated the mangrove coast in Indonesia, just to give you an idea. This is one of our projects in the Netherlands. It's a large division dam in the center of our country in a freshwater lake. It was decided that it was not strong enough, not reliable enough anymore. So it had to be strengthened. Traditionally, you could take out all these stones, and give it a larger cross-section, bring back the stones. But that was deemed to be too expensive, and we tried a nature-based solution instead. So we analyzed what will happen if you build a foreshore of sandy materials. We never worked with sandy foreshores in stagnant freshwater levels. We know a lot about dynamic saltwater environment. But here we did a pilot test for 3 years. Based on this pilot test, it was decided it was feasible to put this dam into sand on both sides, to let vegetation grow there, and to make it into a nature area. That's important because this system is a relatively dead system. Because there is also because of these hard constructions, there is no room for birds to rest or to feed or to replicate, and these foreshores will do that for them. Also, they will dampen the waves so that the dike, as it was, we don't have to strengthen it anymore because we have lessened the loads on the dike. This is another example. It's an artificial salt water marsh in the city of Delfzijl in the northeast of our country. And here we did an experiment with several mixtures of soil, what is best for vegetation. And also we investigated whether you have to seed vegetation or that you can just rely on the natural system. Well, after 2 years, we can see that this natural system contains enough seedlings to let it grow by itself. These salt marshes also dampen the wave energy with 60%. So in fact, they contribute to the strength of the flood defense. An example of working with communities, we reconstructed a mangrove shoreline in Indonesia. This is an area on the island of Java, and there has been large problems with breaches of mangroves. Coasts have retreated approximately 1.5 kilometers in 10 years' time. So there are a lot of people in trouble here and losing their livelihoods. So it looks like this area. We analyze the system and of course, everything is connected. Building with nature is also about a system-based approach. So you need to analyze the connection between all those aspects. And we decided, let's create a mangrove-based economy, because a prosperous local economy will enable the maintenance of this mangrove belt. Mangrove will provide safety and allow the economy to prosper. We did that by building small dams. You can see that here with traditional materials, can be built by villagers themselves. These stimulate sedimentation, so you can see large mud flats have come into being here. And these mud flats will be colonized by mangroves in the years to come. And we also reconverted obsolete aquaculture ponds into mangrove again, so that you get a dense forest of about 500 meters deep here. That should be the end situation. We learned the farmers to implement more profitable aquacultures through LISA, low external input sustainable aquaculture. Well, their shrimp yield went up 3 to 20 times and their incomes 3 to 9 times. So this was quite successful. And also we introduced again nature into this fish pond system. You can see here it's all gone, but we reconverted part of these ponds into mangroves again to make the whole ecosystem here and the whole aquaculture system more resilient to diseases, etc. Now, I will skip this because of the time. We produced a book in 6 landscapes. We presented how you can use various building with nature concepts. We identified that there are mainly 6 enablers if you want to build with nature. For resilient infrastructure, you have to know technology and system knowledge. You have to be able to work in a multi-stakeholder environment. You need to have a vision on how you will manage, maintain and monitor your nature-based solution after it has been constructed. Institutional embedding is important. Business case, of course. What does it bring you? What does it cost? And capacity building, because we don't have a lot of professionals who know how to work with this. Now, I also want to point out, yesterday at the CAS, we launched a paper scaling up investment. So there is a lot of doubts how to finance this kind of solutions. You can download a white paper on that or watch a webinar on our website. And another paper that we launched yesterday is about how to deal with uncertainty. Nature-based solutions are nature, so they are unpredictable. This paper will show you how to deal with that. And this is our book, and you can order it also in the United States via Amazon. And this is here ends my contribution. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Henk. And if we can stop sharing just for a second, actually for this part, also just to have a little bit more interaction, I really welcome everyone on the group to please turn on your cameras, because we will be asking the presenters directly a little bit more about nature-based solutions. And I also wanted to show a show of hands of who, what is our understanding on nature-based solutions? Do we need to provide a little bit some starting context? Because I do see a lot of terminology being thrown around, and I just wanted to make sure everyone is familiar with these terms and with this, actually, with this approach. If you could summarize it just in a small sentence, Kelly, how would you define to someone that it's very new, that maybe it's coming from a county or for a small municipality that sees the value in this, but how would you describe it?
It's tricky to do in one sentence, but we think about it as sort of a spectrum of what's green to gray. When we think about shoreline protection, we usually think about seawalls and the concrete hardening and armoring. But what the Nature Conservancy is really wanting to prioritize is the wilding of the coasts, or protecting the natural coastlines and their natural ecosystem functions. of protection and of all of those other ecosystem services that they provide. So here in Maryland, we have lots of examples of some hybrids like living shorelines that we, it depends who you're talking to, who's classifying them as nature-based or, where they fall on that spectrum. But we like to see things that both promote those ecological benefits, but also the human benefits that we, in terms of flood risk reduction and protection, that we care about.
Excellent, excellent. And I think you put it really good in context, because it is different, as Hank said, like in every place. It's really locally based. So yeah, I think so. In Maryland, that means rewilding the coast. Great.
At least at the Nature Conservancy. I won't speak for everybody in the state, but
exactly. No, but good, good. And Hank, how would you describe the approach to nature-based solutions by EcoShape?
EcoShape is officially called the Building with Nature. It is officially EcoShape Building with Nature, and Building with Nature is a way to realize, or is a design and construction method to realize infrastructure, water-related infrastructure that provides value to society, but makes use of natural processes to fulfill that function, and makes as much as possible use of natural materials. If you like, I can also share with you the definition by the IUCN of nature-based solutions, because that's quite enlightening.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, actually, we're great friends with them and really have a nice collaboration. Now, one thing I wanted to highlight. Oh, great. Thank you. Perfect.
Yeah, we've used this at TNC as well. So I
yes,
think that
because I heard you speaking, Kelly, and I recognized all the elements of the IUCN definition. So it's about protecting, sustainably manage and restore natural and modified ecosystems. And you do it in a way that you address a certain societal challenge effectively and adaptively. So for instance, flood protection or resilience. But you do it in a way that you provide both human well-being and biodiversity benefits. Now I'm looking for the stop here.
Excellent.
I'm glad you had that handy. That's a good one.
Yes. And one thing that I just wanted to highlight that both of you have mentioned is this multifunctional approach, right? That you're looking for those projects that not only help rewild or restore nature, create protection through nature, but that you're also looking for those projects that as a side effect provide different benefits. And Kelly you mentioned that as multiple benefits, and Hank mentioned that also if you are having different stakeholders involved, you will have different angles of benefit to the project. So can you make a little more reflections about how that has happened in your projects, Kelly?
Yeah, we're sort of we're an early program here, at least in Maryland, but in places where I've worked in California, we worked with communities where we asked them to select which adaptation approaches they wanted to see, which might have been different from the ones that the Nature Conservancy wanted to see necessarily. And we modeled sort of the shoreline change associated with those things and the economic impacts associated with those things. So it's a whole suite of different, we considered ourselves information providers at that stage in the adaptation process, where we're bringing the science to bear so that communities can understand, what adaptation approaches they have to choose from, and then select based on what makes the most sense for the communities. So it really depends who's involved in the conversation, I think, and there's lots of different land uses, and not everybody's desires for or vision for coastal land use is the same. So you really need to have those robust, very challenging conversations that are going to come down to communities making very difficult decisions about what we value the most as a group, which is pretty challenging to do, which is I think why Edwin's slides really spoke to me, that these are supposed to be these magical solutions that do all of these different things and please everybody at the same time. And I saw a question in the chat there about the different sort of trade-offs for, or what would be the benefit to private landowners, and it's very depending on the impacts that they're experiencing and the adaptation approaches that you would select and how the approaches impact people. So it's pretty nuanced and site specific.
Excellent. And Henk, in the same way, how do you see the before we go into questions, because I'm really curious to get this conversation started, but just to clarify and just get your input on this, how do you see the multifunctional angle of the projects that you do on building with nature?
Yeah, during my presentation, I showed you this salt marsh, this artificial salt marsh, and it was built primarily to increase the safety of the area behind it. So it was basically a flood protection initiative. But it also, because it's a nature-based solution, because we use natural features to break waves and make lessen the load on the flood defense. But it has a lot of added value. It produces all kinds of added values for the estuary where it is in. It is very important that we have more of these shoals, because this estuary, our people have reclaimed a lot of these salt marshes in the past, have turned them into agricultural land behind the flood defense. So they were cut off from the estuary. The entrance channels to ports, they were made deeper than before to accommodate larger vessels. So this estuary has a big problem with floating sediments, fine sediments. And we need those flatlands, those shoals, those marshes to capture these sediments. So this is an important function that they fulfill, an ecosystem service they provide. And another one is the disappearance of these flats also means that there is no place for birds to rest and to sit. And our country is a very important country on migration routes from the polar areas and Siberia to Africa. So we always have a lot of birds passing our country and looking for places to sit and rest. And many species also stay in springtime to reprocreate themselves. But in this estuary, a lot of possibility was lost. So the ecosystem had deteriorated, and that's another service these marshes provide, that they give an impulse to the ecosystem. And so, last but not least, the town behind it it's a town with very low qualities. So it's one of the fastest shrinking towns in the Netherlands. And these marshes also add to the landscape there immediately in front of the town, so that to live there will become more attractive. So you get a spectacular landscape, more birds, etc. So it adds to the quality of living. So it is also a social benefit.
And for those that may want to Google it later, what is the name of this area?
Yes, it is called Marconi. So that is the famous Italian inventor of the radio, I think, or for the telegraph. And you can find it on the website. It's ecoshape.org. There is an extensive description of it.
Okay. Now, I would like to thank you very much also, because I just wanted to provide a little bit of framework to make sure that we all start in a little bit in the same level, this conversation. I wanted to, I see a very nice question by Dave Hampton. Dave, if you could ask, just to make sure that I get the nuance of your question. So do you want to turn on your mic and ask the presenters?
Sure. I just was curious about the nuances between nature-based solutions for coasts, for tidally influenced rivers, which is common along the U.S. East Coast, and inland conditions such as streams, ponds, lakes, as well as non-water bodies potentially, because there is a fair amount of flooding. So what kinds of distinctions are there between the open sea and, say, more integrated water management for NBS?
I don't want to answer a question with more vague questions for you, but I think it depends what you're managing for, what you're solving for. And so I think you're going to see a whole suite of different options in each of those different ecosystems or habitat types. So I think it really, it depends what you're trying to solve for. If you're trying to solve for flood risk reduction for communities, then you're going to have different approaches depending, like for an open coast, you most likely have a lot more fetch and a lot more dynamic energy. So you're going to have probably grayer solutions on that spectrum of that green to gray. But I think it just really, it depends what you're solving for. And Hank, maybe you have something more to add there.
One of the things you have to do if you want to work with nature-based solutions or building with nature, you always have to think from the system in which you are working. And obviously systems differ very much. So that's also why nature-based solutions are always very context specific. So, and then if you add to that, which societal challenge do you want to address? That determines the nature-based solution that is feasible or that you can choose. For instance, if you want to solve a flood protection problem on a sandy coast, then you have to take a look at how sediments are moving, what is the proportion of still weather versus stormy weather there, is the supply of sand enough in your situation? Is there a supply at all? And if you go inland, for instance, and you have a city in a valley where a river is going through, which is fed by many tributaries from the mountains, and there is a flood problem, you have to address the root cause of the peak discharges, and you may choose to buffer water up in the tributaries, up in the mountains. Through the creation of marshes or forests, or realigning canals, maybe remeandering them. So that's what I would like to say about it. And again, I want not to repeat myself too much, but you can find on our website. It has been built around these landscapes, various landscapes. And per landscape, we give building with nature solutions, and it is described how you can apply them. So you can find an impression there also.
Excellent. So because there's like a library of projects, and I imagine the Nature Conservancy also has something like that. Maybe we can share it at the end of this, that we can see a little bit, take something with us after the meeting. Because I think Henk also mentioned some design building guidelines, and I think to me that's my language, so I really look forward to see that. And a very good question from Jane 30. Jane, if you could unmute yourself, and you have a very good point about like nature-based solutions for rural agricultural lands. Please go ahead. I think you are on mute, but... there we go.
Okay, got it. Hello, everyone. And I've worked for 10 years now on issues of the environment and horse farms in the state of Maryland. And one of the things that it's led me to is to think very broadly about the profitability of the use of land. So it seems like most of what you're talking about is very much about set-asides or regulations or parks or easements or preserves, which is great. And we have a lot of that in Maryland. But we also have a lot of agricultural land, over 700,000 acres in horse farms in the state of Maryland, 1/4 of all ag land. But we also have grazers and soybeans and corn and chicken. And so we're trying to move toward having the agricultural sector be more user-friendly to the environment. And there are a lot of good leaders in that and good approaches. So I'd be interested in trying to promote and hear your ideas about how you can encourage landowners to put in practices that are good for the natural environment, and also create incentives and recognition programs to make it attractive and not just regulatory. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm happy to take a quick stab at that. You know, it's a tricky challenge. And, you know, I've heard that there's lots of movement to explore different types of crops that people can be using. Now, this is not horse farm specific. I don't know a ton about that, so I'll be honest about that. But I have heard that we've been exploring use of different types of salt tolerant grass species and trying to create different, and by we, I do not mean the Nature Conservancy. I've just heard that in Maryland, people are exploring that. And it's tricky. I mean, it's hard to harvest if it's soggy on the ground. So there's some like basics there of trying to create new systems for products that maybe don't have a market yet, but that we think might have some profitability for different parts of the agricultural industry. So I think it's complex, and I don't know that we have it all solved and locked down yet, but I know that it's a dialogue, and a lot of scientists in the area are researching what different ways that we can try to make people whole as we go through these transitions and figure out how to keep our, cultural heritage and our livelihoods intact even as they shift. So I don't know that I have necessarily an answer, but we are looking at exploring voluntary type easement programs and incentivizing some of this transition in places where it's already soggy, where farmers aren't able to actively, use the land for production, to try to figure out how to make them a little bit more whole as this is happening on their properties. So don't have this sort of silver bullet answer there, but I'd love to continue that conversation. It's one we think about a lot.
Excellent. And Henk, do you have any impressions? Because the Netherlands is such an agricultural country. So what are your impressions on this question? How has been the relationship with the board?
It's totally not my expertise, but the funny thing is that my brother, who is 3 years younger than I am, this year stepped down as the CFO of a multinational company. He bought himself a farm and is going to experiment with exactly what you mentioned, Jane. So maybe after 2 or 3 years, I can tell you what he achieved. But it is of course a very important question. And there is another program in the Netherlands, which is or from the Netherlands, which is called Common Land. And they do exactly what you are looking for. They are experimenting with rehabilitating landscapes, with degraded landscapes, based on a very clear concept that they call 20 years, 4 returns, and 3 zones. It might be interesting to take a look at their website. I will put it in the chat.
Excellent. And I just wanted to, because this is a conversation, to raise the floor to Julie Reichert, who's here from NOAA. I see some very interesting comments about treating salt marsh as a crop. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, this is just a conceptual idea that our work group members have been floating around with our Maryland partners. Really, our Maryland partners has been thinking a lot about it. But the challenge we have in Maryland is that we are going to deal with a lot of marsh loss because of sea level rise, and we also have land sinking in this area. So it's just sort of a double whammy in trying to address these issues. And we have a lot of ag lands, coastal ag lands, that is going to have potential for marshes to migrate into, but they're private land, they're farmland. So it's trying to about, well, how can we incentivize for these farmers to actually maintain a salt marsh crop? And I say that in quotes because it's not going to be your traditional crop, but have a way to incentivize where it would benefit for them for converting some of their ag land that they use for their traditional crops into the salt marsh, since eventually they're going to see some flooding into their farmland and salt inundation anyways in some of these areas. But we were thinking, like, well, if we can get ahead of this and somehow participate in the different blue carbon crediting protocols that are available and carbon sequestration. But we're really early in thinking through this. And I don't know if anyone has done this before, if anywhere in the Netherlands have considered like sort of these market-based approaches or like public-private partnerships that incentivize sort of the carbon sequestration value to allow farmers to actually be paid for like maintaining a salt marsh on their land.
Julie,
Would you like me to react, Janet?
Yes.
Yeah, a few things I could say to that. what we do in the Netherlands, it's not about carbon sequestration, but in some areas we pay farmers from collective funds for maintaining nature. And so they have part of their land is then recreated into a natural area and they get paid to maintain it. We did a similar thing in Indonesia with this aquaculture land, where the people encroached too much into the mangrove, so that it became very shallow and collapsed. We seduced them by handing back their fish ponds, by paying them through an incentivization system called biorights, the biorights mechanism. And of course, we did it from project funds, but it has to be sustainable. And last year, we made a deal with the local government that the local government will provide the finance to keep on driving this biorights mechanism. So there you have a kind of system, but it is from collective funds. And what is happening, what you describe, that land is turning into more salty, needs different crops, that is something which is going on all over Southeast Asia. And it's a terrible process, because what is happening there, first you have mangroves, people cut it, start producing rice, then you get land subsidence and sea level rise. After a while it becomes too salty for rice, and then they start producing shrimps in aquacultures with unsustainable methods, and 10 years after they started, the area is completely dead. And also because of the changes in land use, there has been a tremendous leakage of CO2. So it's really a disastrous process if you don't have a key how to approach it. Carbon sequestration, salt marshes are relatively efficient. So I think they sequester about 4 tons per hectare per year. And I think a tropical forest does about 1.8 tons per hectare per year. Hectare, is that something you use in the United States? It's 10,000 square meters. And 1 meter is 3 feet, approximately. But the value of that at the moment is still extremely low, because the carbon price in the European trading system is 35 euro at the moment per ton. So you have 4 times 35, which is 140 euro. It's approximately, I think, $150 or something per hectare, per 10,000 square meter, which is very little. Yeah, so that's if you get it paid through an exchange system like that, it will bring you very little revenue. So I have no answer, I'm afraid.
But it's interesting to see the case in Indonesia, because thinking about the shrimp farms and all of that, it is an extreme also example if we see the landscape and read a little bit more about the Java projects. But yeah, very good. But I think what I'm hearing a lot is, like engaging those landowners, giving them, a role in this, giving them, trying to find benefits. What I'm also hearing from Henk, dedicating project funds for that, the easement approach as well, this voluntary, not the stick but the carrot. I think is the only way to make progress with this topic. Now, I did want to get into some practical curiosity questions. I do see that Ben had asked, here, along those lines, are there financing instruments that are possible to incentivize this action? So I'm hearing a couple of them. Do you have any other more examples, or does anyone in the group? But I'll start with Kelly and then Henk.
I think this just builds on what Julie was saying before, that we're trying to incentivize this, get ahead of what's happening, and create these funding mechanisms. We're exploring, our program's exploring piloting these blue carbon and resilience crediting programs. We're exploring it, and we're running up against a lot of the challenges that Hank mentioned, and yet we think that there might be something there that can help generate the types of funding that we need to support landowners, but also to hopefully contribute to that longer term operation and maintenance, because what we're seeing as the habitats are migrating here, they're not healthy and they're not providing all those ecosystem services that we want to see. So you have these dead trees and invasive reeds, which provide something. I mean, Phragmites is good at buffering wave energy to an extent, so there's something there, but from the Nature Conservancy perspective, from a biodiversity perspective where you want really robust habitat, you're not seeing that. And that's not the coastal habitat that I want to leave to my kid and yeah, our grandkids. You know, I want that beautiful biodiversity of the wetlands that we love. So we really need to facilitate that, and it's going to require that operations and maintenance cost and sort of the hand-holding, if you will, until we figure it out and how to jumpstart the ecosystem transition on its own. In a more healthy way. So they're big fundamental shifts, and that's kind of the bulk of what we don't have the answer. I'm not going to say that I have an answer for you guys here today, but it's what I spend my days in and out thinking about, how we shift significant funding streams. And some of the stuff that's coming out of FEMA's new BRIC program is promising. You know, it's aimed at supporting these bigger picture projects that we've started to see. So I'll wrap up there, but yeah.
Thank you. And Hank, if you could close us with your final impressions on that, and we will have to close. I am super engaged in this discussion, so I hate that I have to plug the, push a button. But I also wanted to say, this is also great for this one-on-one discussions that we will have next. So please, when you come back to the plenary, please do engage in the one-on-one resilience chats, because I think this is great for us to dig deeper on these topics. Thank you, Hank.
Yeah, you want some remarks still?
Yes, please. Just to,
yeah. Okay, well, finance is a challenge because I work in the infrastructure world, so mainly our nature-based solutions are about infrastructure. We talk to asset managers; they are used to gray infrastructure. So we need to convince them that these solutions bring society more than traditional solutions. That's not a very difficult task because it's obvious. But very often we get the reaction, yeah, but all these co-benefits, why don't we ask others to contribute? And then you get to the difficult part. Because our world, our institutions are silos, monofunctional silos, each with their own budget and their own task. And then you have to align them and to get them to pool resources, etc. That's a very difficult task.